hello all. I'm King John, and yes, a king is a king, even if he doesn't look rich. But you're you, and that's awesome, so you should keep doing that. I want to have a conversation with you about a topic that I'm thinking about for a very, very long time. I'm a major history buff. I can't buy it honestly. My father was one before me. And, well, here's a question I think really needs to be asked. Was Robert E. Lee actually a good general? Now, if you are an adherent of the cult of Lee, then your tiny brain's probably exploding right now at the idea of someone even asking that question. However, I am reasonably certain that you are an intelligent, thoughtful person who is perfectly willing to accept any, what's the word? Any question that is asked in good faith. So, was Robert E. Lee actually a good general? Well, that's tough. Because there are generals like McClellan you can point at and objectively say, yeah, he sucked. And there are other generals like, say, Gerd von Rundstedt. You can point to him and objectively say, yeah, he was very good. He was consistently successful for a very long time, even when very heavily outnumbered. Lee, well, there were some things he was very good at. And there were other things he was, well, let's look at his record. Okay, so, looking specifically at his record as a general, and he was only a general in the Confederate Army. So, leaving out his earlier service in the U.S. Army in the war in Mexico and on the plains and whatever. So, his first command in the Confederate Army was in West Virginia, the Battle of Cheat Mountain. And that was a complete failure. Complete. And really, it's all on Lee. Because he chose the places to attack. He chose the tactics to use. He chose the timing. It was all on him. And every choice he made was bad. Okay, the timing was bad. The weather was awful. He chose to divide his army several times, sending them on widely different routes to attack the Union defenders from several different directions, with literally no communication between each other. Now, bear that in mind, because that's going to be a bit of a theme. When it came to, what's the word? I used the word tactics already. When it came to making the actual attack, soldier to soldier, on the actual battlefield, Lee chose to send his soldiers head-on into entrenched Union positions. Mark that down as well, because that also will be a bit of a running theme. Lee's next command. After his failure in West Virginia, Lee was transferred to command the coast of, I think it was the Carolinas. And he took command, and in a very short while, he lost almost all of the territory that he was supposed to be defending. Now, to a certain extent, you need to blame other people for that as well. Lee was not in command for very long when the Union attacked. And a large amount of the blame must be laid on the Confederate government. There's so much you can blame on the Confederate government. They were not very good at their job. But Lee was in command. It was his command, his forces, again, his tactics. He chose the positions. And, if he'd won, he would have gotten all the credit. But he lost. And so he must take the blame for it. That's the point of having a person in command. So, Lee's next command, and this is an amazing example of everything that was wrong with the Confederate government. Because the Confederate Army around Richmond was commanded by Joe Johnston, who was actually a very good general. He was very successful throughout most of the war. Just about the only enemy Johnston could not defeat, in fact, was Jeff Davis. Yeah, Jeff Davis had a personal grudge against Joe Johnston, and when Johnston was wounded at, I don't remember the name of the battle. he was wounded at a particular battle, and Davis took the opportunity to remove him from command. And so he now had an opening, and he had to fill it, or else Joe Johnston would take command again. And so he grabbed Lee and shoved him in place. And the only reason Lee was put in command was because he was the one person available to take Joe Johnston's place. That's literally it. That's all the reason for it. Oh, by all means, fact check me on this. Look it up. Do your own research. Please do. Like I said, I'm a major history buff, and I love it when people do their own research. I love that. Please do that. So Lee's third command, his third battle of the war, was the Battle of the 7 Days. So the Union Army under McClellan had taken a seaborne route to attack Richmond. And they were very close to the city, and so Lee took command, and technically this was a victory, technically, because Lee did succeed in forcing McClellan's forces away from Richmond, but the way he did it was to send his troops head-on against entrenched Union forces. I told you that would be a running theme. There were no clever tactics. There were none. Again, look this up. He just smashed his men into the Union forces again and again and again, spending lives like they were hammer blows. I don't think that simply works very well. But anyway, so if he did that, because you are an intelligent audience, so maybe you're thinking a little critically right now, saying something like, well, if he did that, how did it work? How did he drive them away if he was so stupid? Well, the answer is, he spent lives. A lot of lives. As in, tens of thousands. As in, the Union forces did retreat over the course of the 7 days, and they lost 10,000 men. It had 10,000 men were casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. And that's a lot. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of death and pain and misery. But at the same time, the men under Lee's command suffered 20,000 casualties. Twice as many. To quote Archibald Wavell, the man who enraged Churchill more than anyone else in history, a high butcher's bill is not a sign of a good tactician. Now, if Lee had been facing almost literally any general in history other than McClellan, the 7 days would have been a complete disaster for the Confederacy. And it still kind of was. But because he was facing McClellan, who was either treacherous or incompetent, and there's evidence that goes both ways on this. Union forces retreated, and they did nothing. They just sat there for a long time until Lincoln took action, removed McClellan, and excuse me, and moved the Union Army north to become part of what became the Army of the Potomac. So Lee named his army the Army of Northern Virginia. And, well, he did win battles. When it came to, when it came to actually doing stuff in a battle, he was actually pretty good at tactics. He was pretty good at moving soldiers and units around to shore up weaknesses and take advantage of enemy vulnerabilities. He was good at that. Um, he he won. I think it was the second Battle of Bull Run. I don't know if there were too many. I can't keep him straight. And after that, he went on the Appomattox campaign, also aka the Maryland campaign. Now that it's a little hard to know why, because after the Battle of Bull Run, he specifically said he was not going to do anything. He was going to rest his soldiers. He was going to reorganize them. He was going to treat their wounds and gather supplies. He was going to do the things that you need to do after a battle, even a battle you win. And then, for some reason, he changed his mind. Now, again, do your own research on that. Some of the things I say may be a little controversial, but they are based on very strong historical evidence. So, Lee took his army into Maryland, and his soldiers were tired. They were exhausted. Okay, remember, this was a time when almost all soldiers had to walk. According to an estimate made by James Longstreet, nearly one half of the entire Army of Northern Virginia dropped out of the ranks from sheer exhaustion. And so, well, the Appomattox campaign ended with Confederate defeat, and Lincoln felt empowered to make his Emancipation Proclamation, which was a very empowering thing for the Union cause. Now, the next battle that Lee fought, as far as I can recall, maybe it's something in the middle that I'm not remembering right now, was Fredericksburg. Now, Fredericksburg was a complete victory for the Army of Northern Virginia. It was an amazing thing, made possible by Burnside, the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, being incompetent. Now, the thing about Fredericksburg is that although it was a very great victory, it's not how Lee wanted to fight. He didn't want to sit behind walls and shoot at the enemy as they approached. He wanted to attack. He wanted to, what's the word? Clausewitz, in his Art of War, says that defense is stronger, but it's negative in that you are not accomplishing your goals, you are preventing the enemy from accomplishing theirs. Attack is weaker, but it's positive in that you are attempting to accomplish your goals. Lee wanted to accomplish things. He had things he wanted to do. And one of the things he really wanted to do was he wanted to destroy, not defeat, destroy the Army of the Potomac. Now, when I say this, and what I'm going to tell you now here, is partly based on my own research, my own opinions, and partly based on things that Lee said himself, and partly based on some lectures given at the U.S. War College. What was his name? Professor's name? I don't remember. Anyway, so again, don't take my word for it. Do your own research. There's plenty of evidence for what I'm going to tell you. So Lee saw an opportunity when the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, Joe Hooker, divided the Army of the Potomac, left part of it at Fredericksburg, and took the larger part to Chancellorsville. So Lee saw an opportunity, and he attacked. Hello, sorry about that jump cut. Computer cut out. Anyway, so at the point when Lee attacked Hooker at Chancellorsville, his army was not complete. Well, neither army was complete, actually, because both of them had divided their forces. Lee had dispatched Longstreet and his corps to the Carolinas for essentially a giant foraging expedition. Now, if Lee could have waited for Longstreet to come back, then he would have had more men, more supplies, more everything, and could have then attacked a part of the Army of the Potomac with the complete Army of Northern Virginia. Now, there's some debate on whether how much time he had, but again, do your own research. But Lee attacked Hooker at Chancellorsville, and he divided his forces in the face of the enemy, and this time it kinda worked. I say kinda. Remember that. And the battle is widely regarded as Lee's greatest victory, because he divided his forces in the face of the enemy, which he always did, even a clock struck. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And so it finally worked. Finally. But, again, kinda. Because, again, Lee's goal was to destroy the Union Army. Not defeat it, not drive it back, destroy it. And part of the reason we know this is that after the battle, when he learned that the Union Army had escaped encirclement, and so even though they lost a lot of casualties, the army still existed, he flew into a rage. He was screaming, he was cursing at his subordinates, calling them incompetent and traitors. Really, it's very out of character for the man. Well, one of the things that Lee was very good about at being a general, he was very charismatic. He was very good at building a personal rapport between himself and his subordinates. So this screaming and flying into a rage, this was, I think it's the only time he did that in the war. So, Chancellorsville, although it's technically a victory because the Confederates did hold the field at the end, and they did inflict more casualties on the Army of the Potomac than were suffered by the Army of Northern Virginia. The casualties in the Army of the Potomac were replaceable. The casualties in the Army of the Northern Virginia really were not. Lee lost killed, wounded, and missing 1/3 of his entire army, over 1/3 of all of his officers, including Stonewall Jackson, who is another general who I think a lot of people give more credit than is actually due, but that's not the topic of today's video. So then, Lee embarks on the Gettysburg Campaign. Now, I would love to talk about the Gettysburg Campaign and all the things that Lee got wrong. However, I think that would be a little unfair, because although Lee did screw up a lot in the Gettysburg Campaign, although a lot of his screw-ups were very typical of the man, the Gettysburg Campaign was not typical of Lee. Okay? The Gettysburg Campaign was Lee having a mental breakdown. Really. Okay. So, the topic is whether or not Lee was a good general. So, talking about, so if I was saying Lee was a terrible general because of the Gettysburg Campaign, then I need to say that Grant was a drunkard because he went on a bender down the Mississippi, or Sherman was a complete wacko because he went to the asylum, or Hood was a butcher because he went on the Nashville Campaign. Well, he kind of was a butcher anyway, but I digress. So I'll only touch on a few things in the Gettysburg Campaign, as I think they are generally applicable to Robert E. Lee. Now, like I said, one of the things that Lee was good at being a general was he was very good at building a rapport between himself and his subordinates. One of the things he was very bad at was making clear orders. Sorry about that, another jump cut. So Lee gave orders to Jeb Stuart that for the Army of Northern Virginia marched north, he, Stuart, was to stay on the flank of Ewell's corps to guard them from the Union Army. However, just the day after that, he issued new orders saying, if General Hooker's army remains inactive, you can leave 2 brigades to watch him and withdraw with the 3 others. But should he not appear to be moving northward, I think you had better withdraw this side of the mountain tomorrow night, cross at Shepherdstown the next day, and move over to Fredericktown. You will, however, be able to judge whether you can pass around their army without hindrance, doing them all the damage you can and cross the river east of the mountains. In either case, after crossing the river, you must move on and feel the right of Ewell's troops, collecting information, provisions, etc. Be watchful and circumspect in all your movements. So, based on those orders, what did Lee actually want Stuart to do? Because he says, if Hooker's army is moving, I think you had better withdraw. Yet you will, however, be able to judge whether you can pass around their army without hindrance. So he's saying, I think if this happens, you should do this, but you're also free to do that if you think you want to. Nowhere in these orders does he emphasize that Stuart should return as soon as possible and rejoin with Ewell's corps. So afterward, he doesn't say, be back by this day. He doesn't say, get back as soon as humanly possible. He doesn't say, we need you to stay with the army as much as possible so we can actually know where we're going. These are very vague, very discretionary orders. And so, if you leave Stuart free to do what Stuart wants to do, Stuart is going to do what he wants to do, and then later, Lee blamed Stuart for doing what Stuart wanted to do, that Lee told him he could do in these very vague discretionary orders. And I said that earlier, Lee, one of the things Lee was good at was having a good rapport with his subordinates. So having such a good rapport with, say, Longstreet or Stonewall Jackson, he could give them the vague discretionary orders, and he could have a fairly good idea of what they were going to do up to a point. Sometimes it broke down. In this case, it all broke down. At Gettysburg, again, he gave Ewell discretionary orders to attack Cemetery Hill, but not to bring on a general engagement with the Union Army. Ewell saw he could take the hill, but he couldn't do it without bringing on a general engagement with the Union Army. So he didn't attack. And later, Lee blamed Ewell for not attacking, even though Lee did not give clear orders. And again, at Gettysburg, Lee divided his army, and he attacked piecemeal, sending his soldiers head-on straight into Union soldiers behind entrenchments. Again, this is a running theme throughout his entire career. So, his career is spotty. Was Lee a good general? Better than average? With some major exceptions? Even after Gettysburg, he didn't learn his lesson about dividing his army. But you know what? I think I've rambled on long enough. Thank you for tuning in. I think I've said all I have to say about this. Again, please do your own research. I want people to do their own research. So if you do your own research, please come back and tell me what you find out, because I'd really love to know. In any case, I hope you have a lovely day, and God bless.